The hardwood stairs felt like concrete against my spine. Each step carved a memory into my body as I tumbled down. My wedding ring catching the light from the chandelier above the same chandelier David had. Insisted we buy for our dream home. 3 years ago, the irony wasn't lost on me as I lay crumpled at the bottom, staring up at its crystalline beauty while pain shot through my ribs. My name is Sarah Chen, and I'm 32 years old. Until 2 minutes ago. I thought I was having a normal Tuesday evening argument with my husband about his mother's upcoming visit. Until 2 minutes ago. I thought the worst thing that could happen was another weekend of passive-aggressive comments about my cooking and career choices. I was wrong. Sarah, David's voice came from the top of the stairs. But it wasn't the concerned tone you'd expect from someone whose wife had just fallen. It was panic, but not the kind that comes from love. It was the panic of someone realizing they crossed a line they could never uncross. The front door opened just as I was trying to sit up. My sister Emma walked in, still in her scrubs from her nursing shift, her arms full of takeout bags. Behind her came my parents, Mom clutching her oversized purse and Dad checking his watch like he always did when he was uncomfortable. Surprise, Emma called out, her voice bright and cheerful. I brought Thai food and thought we could. Her words died as she saw me on the floor. David frozen at the top of the stairs like a deer in headlights. The silence that followed wasn't just quiet, it was a living thing that wrapped around all of us, squeezing until breathing became difficult. Emma's eyes moved from me to David, then to the obvious bruise already forming on my cheek where I'd hit the banister on the way down. Mom's hand flew to her mouth, but no words came out. Dad just stood there, his jaw working like he was chewing words he couldn't swallow. I fell, I said quickly, the lie burning my tongue. I was hurrying down to get the door, and I slipped. Emma knelt beside me, her nurse instincts kicking in as she gently probed my ribs. Her eyes met mine, and I saw the knowledge there. She knew. Of course she knew. Emma had seen enough domestic violence cases in the air to recognize the signs. But when our eyes met, I shook my head almost imperceptibly. Not now. Not like this. Nothing broken, she said softly, helping me to my feet. But you should probably ice that cheek. David finally descended the stairs, his movements careful and measured. Honey, I'm so sorry. I tried to catch you when I saw you stumble, but I wasn't fast enough. His voice was perfect, just the right amount of concern and regret. He'd always been good at performing. Mom finally found her voice. These stairs are so steep, David. I've always worried about them. We should probably get some of those runner strips, Dad added, grateful to have something practical to focus on. You know, the ones with the grit backing, and just like that. They all chose to believe the lie, or maybe they chose to let me tell it. I'm still not sure which is worse. David guided me to the couch with the tenderness of a devoted husband. His hand on my elbow was gentle, protective even. If you didn't know better, if you hadn't seen the flash of rage in his eyes 20 minutes earlier, when I'd suggested his mother could stay in a hotel instead of our guest room, you'd think he was the perfect partner. Let me get you some ice, he murmured, disappearing into the kitchen. I could hear him moving round, the clink of ice cubes, the rustle of a dish towel. He was buying himself time, I realized. Time to figure out how to play this. Emma sat beside me, her professional demeanor a thin mask over her concern. How's your vision? Any nausea? I'm fine, I insisted, though my ribs ached with each breath. Really, Em. I just lost my footing. She didn't believe me. I could see it in the way her lips pressed together, the way her eyes kept drifting to the stairs, as if they might tell her what really happened. But she didn't push, not with Mom and Dad there. Not with David returning with a makeshift ice pack wrapped in one of our good dish towels here. "Sweetheart," David said, his voice soft as silk. He pressed the ice to my cheek with such care that, for a moment, I almost forgot what had happened upstairs. This was the David I'd fallen in love with, attentive, protective, loving. This was the David who'd brought me coffee in bed every morning for the first year of our marriage. Who'd learned to make my grandmother's dumpling recipe because he knew it reminded me of home. But I could feel the tremor in his hands as he held the ice pack. Fear, not tenderness. Mom busied herself unpacking the Thai food, chattering nervously about the traffic and how busy the restaurant had been. Dad examined our bookshelf with the intensity of a scholar, commenting on titles he'd probably never read. Emma checked her phone, typing something rapidly, all of them doing anything to avoid looking directly at us, at the obvious bruise on my face, at the way David's smile never quite reached his eyes. "You know," Dad said suddenly. Turning from the bookshelf, "I had a similar fall last month. Right down the stairs at the office. Felt like an idiot, but these things happen. Oh yes." Mom added quickly, "And remember when I slipped on those stairs at the mall? Bruised my whole side. They were building me an escape route, paving it with their own embarrassing stories, making it easier for me to maintain the lie, making it easier for them to believe it themselves. We ate dinner on the couch. David's arm around my shoulders, his thumb tracing gentle circles on my arm to anyone watching. We looked like the perfect couple dealing with a minor accident. He asked if I needed more ice, if the pad thai was too spicy, if I wanted to put my feet up. Every kindness felt like a knife twist. Emma left first, hugging me tightly at the door. "Call me if you need anything," she whispered in my ear. "Anything at all. I'm working the overnight shift, so I'll have my phone." Mom and Dad lingered, clearly uncomfortable, but unsure how to address the elephant in the room. Finally, Dad cleared his throat. "Sarah, if you ever need. If there's anything you want to talk about, I'm fine, Dad." The words came out sharper than I intended. "It was an accident." He nodded, but his eyes were troubled. Mom kissed my unbruised cheek, her lips lingering a moment longer than usual. "We love you, sweetheart," she murmured after they left, David and I stood in the foyer, the silence stretching between us like a chasm. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked steadily, marking the minutes until one of us would have to acknowledge what had really happened. Upstairs. 2 hours. That's how long David held it together after my family left. 2 hours of gentle attention, of ice pack adjustments and concerned inquiries about my pain level. 2 hours of playing the devoted husband who was devastated by his wife's accident. I spent those 2 hours watching him, studying the man I'd married. When had the mask become so perfect? When had he learned to perform love so convincingly that even I sometimes forgot? It was a performance. We'd met at a conference 5 years ago. I was presenting research on sustainable architecture, and he was there representing his law firm's environmental division. He'd approached me afterward, genuinely interested in my work, asking intelligent questions that made it clear he'd actually listened to my presentation. Not many men did that. Our courtship had been a fairy tale, thoughtful gestures, romantic dinners, long conversations about our dreams and values. He'd supported my decision to start my own architecture firm, even helping me navigate the legal aspects of incorporation. He'd been proud of my success. Or so I'd thought. The changes had been subtle at first. Comments about my work schedule, disappointment when I had to travel for clients, suggestions that maybe I was taking on too much. When had I worried about you overworking yourself become you care more about your job then? Your family. When had I missed spending time with you become you're never here anyway? And when had disagreement become grounds for violence? I was on the couch, still holding the ice pack to my face, when I heard him moving around upstairs. The floorboards creaked in a familiar pattern. He was pacing in our bedroom, probably trying to process what he'd done. Part of me wanted to go to him, to comfort him, to make this easier for both of us. The instinct was so ingrained I actually started to stand before I caught myself. He pushed you down the stairs, I thought. You don't owe him comfort. But the woman I'd become over the past 3 years, the woman who apologized for working late, who agreed that his mother's criticism was probably justified, who made herself smaller and quieter to avoid setting him off, that woman disagreed. That woman knew that David's anger was always somehow her fault. The pacing stopped. I heard his footsteps on the stairs, slower and more careful than usual. When he appeared in the doorway, his face was red and blotchy, his eyes swollen. He'd been crying. "Sarah," he said, his voice breaking on my name. And then he was on his knees beside the couch, his head in his hands, shoulders shaking with sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep and wounded inside him. "I'm so sorry," he gasped between breaths. "God, Sarah, I'm so sorry. I don't know what happened. I don't know what's wrong with me." This was the part I'd been dreading. Not the anger I'd learned to navigate David's anger over the past year, but this, the broken remorse, the genuine pain in his voice. This was what kept me trapped. Because when David cried, when he showed me this vulnerable, devastated version of himself, I remembered why I'd fallen in love with him. "I love you so much," he continued, reaching for my hands. "You have to know that. You have to know I would never. I didn't mean to. It wasn't supposed to happen like that." His fingers were warm around mine, trembling with emotion. "I've been under so much pressure at work, and with Mom coming, and I know that's not an excuse. But, Sarah, you have to believe me, I love you more than anything in this world. And despite everything, despite the pain in my ribs, and the bruise on my face, and the terror I'd felt tumbling down those stairs, part of me wanted to believe him. Part of me wanted to pull him into my arms and tell him it was okay, that we'd figure it out together, that love could fix this. "I'll get help," he promised, his voice muffled against my knees where he'd buried his face. "I'll see someone, a therapist, a counselor, whatever you want. I'll do anything, Sarah. Just please, don't leave me, leave him." The thought hadn't even occurred to me. Not really. This was David, my husband, my partner. The man who'd held me through my father's heart surgery last year. Who'd celebrated every client I'd landed. Who'd painted our entire house by himself because he knew I loved the color, but we couldn't afford professional painters. This was also the man who'd grabbed my arm so tightly last month that I'd worn long sleeves for a week to hide the fingerprint bruises. The man who'd thrown a plate at the wall during an argument about household chores, then spent the next day replacing it with an exact match as if that erased what had happened. And now, the man who'd pushed me down a flight of stairs because I'd suggested his mother, a woman who'd spent our entire relationship undermining me, might be more comfortable in a hotel. "David," I said quietly, my voice hoarse from crying I didn't remember doing. "You hurt me." He looked up at me, his face a map of anguish. "I know. God, I know. And I hate myself for it. I've never hated anyone the way I hate myself right now. That's not enough," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "Hating yourself doesn't undo what happened. I know that too." He sat back on his heels, wiping his face with the back of his hand. "What can I do? Tell me what to do to fix this." The question hung between us, heavy with implication, because we both knew that some things couldn't be fixed. Some lines, once crossed, changed the entire landscape of a relationship. But I also Knew that in the morning, he'd bring me coffee in bed. He'd ask about my ribs, adjust my pillows. Maybe even call in sick to work to take care of me. He'd be the perfect husband for days, maybe weeks. Until something else set him off and we'd find ourselves back here again. The cycle was as predictable as it was devastating. Sleep didn't come easily that night. David had retreated to the guest room without being asked, leaving me alone in our king-sized bed with my thoughts and my bruises. Every time I shifted, my ribs reminded me of what had happened. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt myself falling again. But it wasn't the physical pain keeping me awake, it was the memory of my family's faces. When they'd seen me at the bottom of those stairs, the careful neutrality in their expressions, the way they'd all immediately looked away, the speed with which they'd accepted my explanation. Had they really believed I'd simply fallen? Or had they chosen to believe it because the alternative was too complicated, too uncomfortable, too demanding of action they weren't prepared to take? I thought about Emma's text messages throughout the evening. She'd sent free, "How are you feeling?" at 9 p.m. "Are you sure you're okay?" at 10:30, "And I'm here if you need to talk at midnight." Each one a lifeline I couldn't quite bring myself to grab, because what would I say? Yes. My husband pushed me down the stairs, but he's also the man who remembers that I like my coffee without milk, not dairy, and always stocks the fridge accordingly. Yes, he hurt me. But he also held me for 2 hours last week when I cried about losing the Morrison project to a bigger firm. Yes, I'm scared of him sometimes, but I also can't imagine my life without him. The complexity of it felt impossible to explain to anyone who hadn't lived it. Round 3 a.m., I heard David moving around downstairs, the soft pan of bare feet on hardwood, the whisper of the refrigerator opening and closing, the creak of the kitchen stool he always sat on when he couldn't sleep. Part of me wanted to go to him, the caretaker in me that had been trained over years of marriage, to soothe his troubled moments. Instead, I stayed in bed and listened to him pace. When morning came, he appeared in the doorway with a tray coffee, toast cut into triangles the way his mother used to make it for him when he was sick, and a small glass vase with a single tulip from our garden. "How are you feeling?" he asked quietly, setting the tray on my nightstand. Sore, I admitted. It was easier than lying and safer than telling the whole truth. He sat carefully on the edge of the bed, his movements cautious, as if I might startle and run. "I called in sick today. I thought I should stay home with you. Make sure you're okay. You don't need to do that." "I want to." His eyes were red-rimmed and earnest. "Sarah, about last night, about what I said, about getting help, I meant it. I found a therapist online this morning, Dr. Mitchell Chen. He specializes in anger management. I can call today, get an appointment for this week." The fact that he'd already researched therapists, that he'd remembered my preference for Asian health care providers, that he was taking concrete steps at all felt significant. It felt like hope. That's good. I said carefully, "And I was thinking," he continued, his voice gaining confidence, "maybe we should go away for a few days. After I see Dr. Chen, I mean, just the two of us. Remember that bed and breakfast in Vermont you liked? We could go back there. Have some time to talk without distractions, without witnesses." A voice in my head corrected, but I pushed it away. David was trying. He was acknowledging that there was a problem and taking steps to fix it. Wasn't that what I'd wanted? Wasn't that what I'd been hoping for through all the smaller incidents? All the times I'd made excuses for his behavior? "Maybe," I said. He smiled then. The first genuine smile I'd seen from him since before the argument about his mother. "I love you. Sarah, I know I have a terrible way of showing it sometimes, But I do, more than anything, the words used to make my heart skip. Now they felt like a weight settling in my chest. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, a text from my assistant, Rebecca, asking if I was still planning to meet with the Henderson clients. At 2 p.m., I'd completely forgotten about the appointment. I need to reschedule my meeting today, I said, reaching for the phone. No. David's hand closed gently over mine, stopping me. Don't cancel work because of this. You love that project. He was right, the Henderson house was exactly the kind of sustainable design challenge I'd dreamed of working on when I'd started my firm. A young couple wanting to build an eco-friendly family home on a difficult hillside lot. It was complex and creative and exactly the sort of work that made me remember. Why I'd become an architect in the first place? I can't go to a client meeting looking like this, I said, gesturing to my bruised face. Makeup, David said simply. You're amazing with makeup. And if anyone asks, you tell them the truth, you fell down the stairs. It happens to everyone. The casual way he said it, the assumption that I would continue the lie, made something cold settle in my stomach. But he was also right about the project. The Hendersons had been trying to find an architect for months, and I couldn't afford to lose them. Okay, I said, but I'll need to stop by the office first, get the updated plans. I'll drive you. He offered immediately. I don't want you driving while you're still hurting. The solicitousness in his voice, the genuine concern it would have been touching if it weren't also a way of maintaining control. If he drove me, he'd know where I went, who I talked to, how long I stayed. He'd be involved in every moment of my day. That's okay, I said carefully. Rebecca can pick me up. She's been wanting to see the Henderson site anyway, a flash of something disappointment. Irritation crossed his face, but it was gone so quickly I might have imagined it. Of course, he said. Whatever makes you comfortable. Makeup, as it turned out, was not the miracle solution David had suggested. No amount of concealer could hide the purple-black bruise that had bloomed across my left cheek overnight. And the foundation only made the swelling more obvious. I looked like someone had tried to erase evidence of violence with drugstore cosmetic switch. I realized with a sick twist in my stomach was exactly what I was doing. Rebecca arrived at noon. Her usual cheerful energy dimming the moment she saw me. Jesus, Sarah, what happened to your face? I fell down the stairs last night, I said. The lie coming easier with repetition, completely lost my footing. Rebecca studied me with the sharp eyes of someone who'd grown up with 3 older brothers and knew what different kinds of injuries looked like. That's a hell of a fall. Hardwood stairs, I said, as if that explained everything. She didn't push. But I caught her watching me carefully as we drove to the office. When I winced getting out of the car, she offered her arm. When I moved slowly gathering the Henderson files, she wordlessly took half the load. Are you sure you're up for this meeting? She asked as we headed back to her car. The Hendersons would understand if we rescheduled. I'm fine, I insisted, though my ribs disagreed with every breath. This project is too important. The Henderson property was a 40-minute drive into the hills outside the city. Rebecca filled the silence with updates on our other projects, carefully avoiding any mention of my appearance or obvious discomfort. I was grateful for her tact, even as I wondered what she was really thinking. The site was beautiful 3 acres of sloping meadow and oak trees with a view of the valley below. Tom and Jennifer Henderson were waiting for us, young and enthusiastic, and full of dreams for their future family home. They wanted something that would blend with the landscape, something that would use passive solar heating and rainwater collection, and all the sustainable technologies that made my work feel meaningful. Sarah, Jennifer called out as we approached, then stopped short when she saw my face. Oh my goodness! What happened? Argument with some stairs, I said lightly. The stairs won. Tom laughed, but Jennifer's expression remained concerned. Are you okay? That looks painful. Just bruised pride and some sore ribs, I assured her. Nothing that will interfere with designing you the perfect house. We spent 2 hours walking the property, discussing sight lines and solar exposure and drainage patterns. The work felt like medicine, something clean and creative and entirely separate from the mess of my personal life. For those 2 hours, I was just Sarah Chen, architect, not Sarah Chen, woman who'd been pushed down the stairs by her husband. But even as we talked about foundation placement and window orientation, I was aware of Rebecca watching me. When I stumbled slightly on the uneven ground, she was there with a steadying hand. When I paused to catch my breath after a particularly steep climb, she suggested we take a break to review the topographical maps. As we prepared to leave, Jennifer pulled me aside. Sarah, I hope you don't mind me asking, but are you sure you're all right? You seem, I don't know, fragile today. The word hit me like a physical blow. Fragile. Was that what I become? Was that what people saw when they looked at me now? I'm fine, I said automatically. Really? Just a little banged up from the fall. Jennifer nodded, but her eyes were troubled. Okay. But if you ever need anything, and I mean anything, you have my number. Sometimes we all need someone to talk to. In the car on the way back, Rebecca was quiet for a long time. Finally, as we hit the highway, she spoke. Sarah, I've known you for 3 years. I've seen you work through the flu, present to clients with a broken wrist, and negotiate contracts with a migraine that would have felled a normal person. You're the toughest person I know. I waited for the but I could hear coming. But today you seem scared. Not hurt, not tired, scared. And that worries me. My hands clenched in my lap. I'm not scared. Okay, she said simply. But if you ever are, if you ever need anything, I'm here. No questions asked. The kindness in her voice, the careful way she'd phrased it broke. Something loose inside me. For a moment, I considered telling her everything. Rebecca was practical and loyal and had no connection to David. She would listen without judgment. Help me figure out what to do next, Dot. But then I thought about the conversation that would follow. The questions about how long this had been going on, why I hadn't left sooner, what I was planning to do now. I thought about the pity in her eyes, the way she'd handle me differently afterward, the way she'd probably feel obligated to report what she knew. And I thought about David waiting at home with dinner preparations and genuine remorse and a therapist's phone number. Thank you, I said instead. But I'm okay, really. The lie sat between us for the rest of the drive, heavy and obvious. But Rebecca didn't challenge it, and I was grateful for that small mercy. David was in the kitchen when I got home, surrounded by the ingredients for my grandmother's dumpling recipe. The irony wasn't lost on me after pushing me down the stairs. He was making the food that represented comfort and family and all the things that were supposed to be safe. How did the meeting go? He asked, looking up from the cutting board where he was mincing ginger. Well, they're excited about the project. And Rebecca, did she ask about? He gestured vaguely toward my face. I told her I fell down the stairs. He nodded, relief evident in his posture. Good. That's probably for the best. Until we figure out how to handle this. As if my bruised face was a public relations problem to be managed, rather than evidence of what he'd done to me. I called Dr. Chen. He continued, his hands busy with the familiar motions of dumpling preparation. I have an appointment Thursday at 2 p.m. I know it's short notice, but he had a cancellation. That's good, I said, meaning it. Whatever else was happening between us, David getting professional help felt like a step in the right direction. I told him a little about what happened, not everything, but enough that he understands why I need to see him urgently. David's voice was steady, but I could see the shame in the set of his shoulders. He specializes in anger management and domestic, in couples therapy. He couldn't even say the words domestic violence, as if not naming it would make it less real. I sat at the kitchen island, watching him work. His hands were gentle with the dough, patient with the intricate pleating that made each dumpling a small work of art. These were the same hands that had pushed me down the stairs less than 24 hours ago. Sarah, he said without looking up from his work, I need you to know something. What happened last night, it's not who I am. It's not who I want to be. Then who are you? The question came out before I could stop it. He paused, his hands stilling. On the dumpling he was shaping. I don't know anymore. I used to think I knew. But these past few months, I feel like I'm losing myself, like there's this anger inside me that I can't control. And it scares me. It was the most honest thing he'd said to me in months, maybe years. The David I'd fallen in love with had been confident and decisive, always. Sure of his place in the world. This uncertain, frightened man was someone I barely recognized. When did it start? I asked. The anger. He was quiet for so long I thought he wasn't going to answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. I think it was when you started succeeding. The words hit me like a physical blow. What? Not that I don't want you to succeed, he said quickly, finally looking at me. I do. I'm proud of you, Sarah. I've always been proud of you. But when you started getting those big clients, when your firm really took off, I started feeling like I was losing you. I never changed. I know that. Logically, I know that. But you started working longer hours, traveling more, bringing in more money than I was making. And instead of being happy for you, I started resenting it. I started feeling like I wasn't enough anymore. The confession hung between us, honest and ugly, and somehow more devastating than the violence itself. Because it meant that my success, the thing I was most proud of, the career I'd built from nothing, had been poisoning our marriage from the inside. That's not my fault, I said quietly. No, he agreed immediately. It's not. It's mine. It's my insecurity, my inability to handle feeling diminished. And somehow I started taking it out on you. Like you were responsible for my failures instead of just successful at your own work. He set down the dumpling he'd been working on and came around the island to where I sat. When he reached for my hands, I didn't pull away. I don't want to be this person, he said. I don't want to be the kind of man who hurts his wife because he can't handle his own inadequacy. That's why I'm seeing Dr. Chen. That's why I'm going to do whatever it takes to fix this. His hands were warm around mine, his eyes bright with unshed tears. This was the David I'd married, vulnerable, honest, willing to acknowledge his flaws and work on them. For a moment, I allowed myself to hope that therapy might actually help, that we might find our way back to each other. Then I shifted slightly, and my ribs sent a sharp reminder of exactly why we needed to find our way back. I want to believe you, I said. Then believe me. Give me a chance to prove that I can change. The request was reasonable. The hope in his voice was real. And sitting there in our kitchen, surrounded by the smell of ginger and the familiar ritual of dumpling making, it felt possible that love might be enough to fix this. But as I looked at my husband, really looked at him, I realized that I was afraid. Not just of his anger, but of my own willingness to forgive it. Not just of what he might do to me, but of what I might allow him to do. And that scared me more than anything. Dr. Mitchell Chen's office was everything you'd expect from a therapist who specialized in anger management, calm, neutral, with carefully chosen artwork that suggested both strength and serenity. David had asked me to come with him to the first session, not as a participant, but for support. And I'd agreed despite my reservations. I sat in the waiting room, reading the same magazine article about sustainable building materials 3 times. While David met with Dr. Chen privately through the closed door, I could hear the rise and fall of voices, David's familiar cadence interspersed with the therapist's calmer, more measured tones. When the door finally opened, David's eyes were red, but he looked more composed than he had in days. "Sarah?" Dr. Chen appeared in the doorway, a man about my age with kind eyes and a firm handshake. "David has given me permission to speak with you briefly, if you're comfortable with that." I followed him into the office while David waited outside. The space felt safe, neutral, like Switzerland in our personal war. "I want you to know," Dr. Chen said once I was seated, "that David has been very honest about what happened. He's not minimizing or making excuses, which is actually a positive sign in terms of his readiness for change. He told you he pushed me down the stairs. He told me about the incident, yes, and about some of the smaller incidents that preceded it." Dr. Chen leaned forward slightly. "Sarah, I specialize in working with people who have used violence against their partners. In my experience, the fact that David sought help immediately, without being given an ultimatum, suggests genuine motivation for change." But he smiled slightly. "You're waiting for the but. There's always a but in these situations, isn't there? The but is that motivation alone isn't enough. Change requires sustained effort, deep self-examination, and a willingness to do the difficult work of understanding why the violence occurred in the first place. It also requires that the person who was harmed feels safe enough to engage in the process. And if I don't, then the process doesn't work. Healing from domestic violence isn't something that can be done to someone. It has to be done with them, and only if they choose to participate." I appreciated his directness, the way he didn't try to sell me on hope I wasn't ready to buy. "David wants me to believe this was an isolated incident," I said, "but there have been other things, smaller things, but still, physical violence rarely appears without warning. Usually there's an escalation pattern: emotional abuse, isolation, control. Maybe some minor physical aggression that gets excused or explained away." The description hit too close to home, the way David had started criticizing my work schedule, his disappointment when I traveled for business, the gradual erosion of my independence disguised as concern for our relationship. "What do you think I should do?" I asked. Dr. Chen was quiet for a moment. "I think you should trust your instincts. You know your husband better than I do, and you know your own situation better than anyone. What I can tell you is that change is possible. I've seen it happen, but it takes time and it requires accountability. And it doesn't happen just because someone feels bad about what they've done. How much time? For meaningful change, a year minimum, maybe longer. And that's with consistent therapy, full engagement in the process, and no additional incidents. A year." The timeline felt both impossibly long and remarkably short. Long enough to rebuild trust, short enough to feel achievable. "There's something else I want you to consider," Dr. Chen continued. "Your safety." David seems genuinely committed to change right now, but the period immediately after someone seeks help can sometimes be challenging. Old patterns don't disappear overnight. "You're saying I should be careful. I'm saying you should have a safety." Plan. People you can call, places you can go, resources available if you need them. Not because I think David will hurt you again, but because you deserve to feel secure while he's doing this work. When I rejoined David in the waiting room, he searched my face anxiously. What did he say? He asked as we walked to the car. Bad. Change is possible, but it takes time. I have time. I have all the time in the world if it means not losing you. The sincerity in his voice was palpable. But I found myself thinking about Dr. Chen's words about safety plans and trusting my instincts. My instincts, which had kept me alive for 32 years. Which had built a successful business from nothing. Which had navigated complex client relationships and difficult construction projects. What did my instincts tell me about David? That he loved me, that he was genuinely sorry, that he was scared of what he'd become, but also that love and remorse and fear weren't the same thing. As safety, over the next 2 weeks, David attended 3 more sessions with Dr. Chen and read books on anger management that the therapist had recommended. He was making a visible effort coming home directly after work, helping more with household tasks, asking about my day with genuine interest rather than interrogation. The bruise on my face faded from purple to green to yellow, becoming easier to hide with makeup until finally it disappeared entirely. My ribs healed. The physical evidence of that night vanished, leaving only the memory and the hyper-awareness of every staircase in our house. David noticed my hesitation around the stairs. We could install a railing on the wall side, he suggested one morning. As I paused at the top, unconsciously gripping the banister tighter than necessary. Make it safer. It's fine, I said, but we both knew it wasn't. The dynamic between us had shifted in subtle ways. David was more careful with his words, more aware of his tone and body language. I was more watchful, more attuned to his moods and stress levels. We were both performing a version of normal that felt brittle and exhausting. Work became my refuge. The Henderson project was moving forward beautifully. We'd submitted the initial designs, and they'd been approved by the county with minimal modifications. I threw myself into the detailed drawings, losing hours in the precise work of translating dreams into blueprints. Rebecca noticed the change in me, the way I stayed late at the office, the way I checked my phone constantly during the day. You know you can work from home sometimes. She pointed out one evening as I prepared to stay until nearly 9. The Hendersons aren't expecting the final plans until next month. I know, I just work better here. It was partially true. The office was quiet and focused, free from the careful tension that had taken up residence in my house. But it was also a place where David couldn't surprise me, couldn't control my movements, couldn't push me down any stairs. The realization that I was avoiding my own home was unsettling. Things came to a head on a Thursday evening in late October. David had been to his therapy session that afternoon and seemed lighter when he came home. More like his old self. We made dinner together, pasta with vegetables from our garden, and were cleaning up when his phone rang. It was his mother. I could hear Margaret's voice through the phone, sharp and demanding even when I couldn't make out the words. David's shoulders tensed as he listened, his free hand gripping the edge of the counter. Yes, Mom, I understand. But, Sarah, and I haven't. We're not ready for house guests right now. More sharp words from Margaret, something about family obligations and ungrateful children. It's not about you, David said, his voice strained. We're just dealing with some things right now, and no, I can't explain it over the phone. I could. See the familiar pattern beginning the tightness around his eyes, the way his jaw clenched. The slow burn of frustration that had preceded every one of our major fights over the past year. Mom, I have to go. We'll talk about this later. He hung up and stood with his back to me. His hands braced against the counter. She wants to come for Thanksgiving, he said without turning round. She's already bought her plane ticket. Okay, I said carefully. No, it's not okay. He turned to face me, and I could see the anger building behind his eyes. She does this every time makes plans without asking, then acts like we're being unreasonable if we object. And now, with everything we're dealing with me trying. He stopped, took a deep breath. I could see him employing the techniques Dr. Chen had taught him: the pause, the breathing, the conscious effort to step back from the emotion. I'm sorry, he said after a moment. I'm not angry at you. I'm angry at her, at the situation. I know. Do you? His eyes search mine. Because I can see you backing away from me, Sarah. Literally, you're standing farther away than you normally would. He was right. I'd unconsciously moved closer to the doorway, positioning myself with an escape route. The awareness was uncomfortable. I'm still adjusting. I said honestly, to what? To me, to being afraid of your own husband. The words hung between us, brutal in their accuracy. Yes, I was afraid of him, not constantly, not in every moment, but enough that I planned my movements differently. Enough that I monitored his moods like a weather vane. David, no, say it. Say that you're afraid of me. His voice was rising, the careful control beginning to slip. Say that the man you married, the man you've loved for 5 years, is now someone you have to be careful around. You're scaring me right now, I said quietly. The words stopped him cold. He looked at me, really looked, and saw whatever was in my face that made him take a step back. Jesus, he breathed. I'm doing it again. You haven't done anything. I'm getting angry, raising my voice, backing you into a corner. I'm doing exactly what Dr. Chen warned me about. He ran his hands through his hair, looking suddenly exhausted. How am I supposed to change if I can't even have a conversation about my mother without scaring you? It was a fair question, and I didn't have a good answer. Because the truth was that I didn't know if he could change, didn't know if we could find our way back to trusting each other. Didn't know if love was enough to bridge the gap that had opened between us. Maybe we need to take a break, I said, the words surprising me as much as they surprised him. What kind of break? I don't know. Some space to think for both of us. The suggestion hung in the air between us, foreign and frightening. We'd never spent a night apart since our wedding, had never seriously considered separation as an option. How long? David asked quietly. I don't know that either. He nodded slowly, and I could see him struggling with the impulse to argue, to convince me that separation wasn't necessary, that we could work through this together. The old David would have fought the suggestion, would have found a way to make me feel guilty for even considering it. This David, the one who'd been doing the work, reading the books, talking to Dr. Chen, just nodded. Where would you go? Emma's, maybe. Or I could stay at the office for a while. No, his voice was firm, but not angry. You shouldn't have to leave your home because of what I did. I'll go. I'll find somewhere else to stay. The generosity of the offer, the recognition that I was the injured party, who deserved to feel safe in her own space, made my chest tight. With emotion, thank you, I said. How long do you think? When should we talk about when I can come home? I don't know, I admitted. A week? 2 weeks? However long it takes for me to figure out what I want. And what if what you want is for me not to come home? The question was asked quietly, but I could hear the fear underneath it. The real fear that this separation might become permanent. That his moment of violence might have cost him everything he valued. I don't know, I said again. because it was the only honest answer I had. We spent the rest of the evening in careful politeness, David packing a bag while I retreated to my office to work on the Henderson plans. When I finally went to bed, he was sleeping in the guest room again, his suitcase by the door like a physical reminder of how fragile our marriage had become. In the morning, he was gone. The house felt different without David in it. Larger and quieter, and somehow more mine than it had been in months. I walked the stairs without hesitation for the first time since the night he pushed me. Ate breakfast at the counter without monitoring his mood. Played music as loud as I wanted while I worked in my home office. The freedom was intoxicating and guilt-inducing in equal measure. Emma called on the second day. David texted me, she said without preamble. He said you two are taking some time apart. We are. Good. The simple approval in her voice caught me off guard. Good, Sarah. I've been worried about you for months. You've been walking on eggshells, making yourself smaller, apologizing for things that weren't your fault. I didn't know how to bring it up without seeming like I was interfering, but I'm glad you're taking space to think. You've been worried about me? Of course I have. You're my sister. I know what you look like when you're happy, and you haven't looked happy in a long time. The observation hit me harder than I'd expected, because she was right, I hadn't been happy. I'd been managing, surviving, trying to maintain equilibrium in a relationship that had become a constant negotiation. He's getting help, I said. Therapy. He's really trying to change. I'm glad. But that doesn't mean you have to stick around while he figures out how to treat you with basic respect. Emma, I'm not telling you what to do, she said quickly. I'm just saying that you deserve better than being afraid in your own house. You deserve better than having to hide bruises with makeup. I never told you about the makeup. You didn't have to. I'm a nurse, Sarah. I know what domestic violence looks like. And I know what the aftermath looks like. The question is, what are you going to do about it? After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen, not our kitchen, and thought about Emma's question. What was I going to do? The practical part of me wanted to make lists, to research statistics about domestic violence, recidivism, and therapy success rates. The emotional part of me wanted to call David, to hear his voice and be reassured that he was okay. That we were okay. Instead, I called Dr. Chen. I was wondering if you'd reach out. He said when his receptionist put me through. David mentioned, you were taking some time apart. Was that the right thing to do? There's no right or wrong here, Sarah. There's only what feels safe and sustainable for you. He seems committed to changing. He does. David is one of the most motivated clients I've worked with. But motivation and actual change are different things, and change takes time. How much time? For someone to fundamentally alter their relationship with anger and control. A year minimum, like I said before, maybe longer. And even then, there are no guarantees. A year. Could I spend a year walking on eggshells, monitoring David's progress? Living in a state of hypervigilance while he did the work of becoming someone who wouldn't hurt me? What would you do? I asked. If it were your wife, your daughter? Dr. Chen was quiet for a long moment. I'd want them to prioritize their safety and their peace of mind above everything else. I'd want them to remember that they can't love someone into changing, that they can't sacrifice their own well-being for someone else's healing process. Even if that someone is genuinely trying, even then, the conversation left me more unsettled than before. Because part of me had been hoping Dr. Chen would tell me that David was special, that his case was different, that love and therapy could fix this quickly and completely. Instead, he'd confirmed what I'd already known deep down. There were no Easy answers, no guarantees, no shortcuts through the long work of rebuilding trust. That evening, I drove to the Henderson property to watch the sunset. The construction crew had broken ground the week before, and the foundation was already taking shape. Standing there looking at the skeletal beginning of what would become a family home, I thought about foundations, how they had to be solid and deep and perfectly level because everything else depended on them. My marriage's foundation had cracks in it. Maybe they could be repaired, filled in, reinforced. But maybe the damage was too extensive. Maybe the whole thing needed to be torn down and rebuilt from scratch. Or maybe I needed to find different ground entirely. David had been gone for 8 days when his mother arrived. I'd forgotten about Margaret's Thanksgiving plans in the chaos of our separation. So, when the doorbell rang at 3 p.m. on a Friday, and I found her standing on my porch, with 2 suitcases and a disapproving expression, I felt blindsided. "Margaret," I said, struggling to hide my surprise. "I thought David was going to call you about Thanksgiving." "He did call me." She brushed past me into the foyer, her sharp eyes taking in the lack of David's jacket on the coat hook. His absence from the living room. He told me some story about needing space. But I decided to come anyway. Family is family. Sarah. The way she said my name made it clear that, in her opinion, I was the reason her son needed space. "Where is David?" she continued, settling herself on the couch as if she owned it. "He's staying somewhere else for a while. Somewhere else." Margaret's voice rose. "You threw my son out of his own house. He chose to leave. We're taking some time to work through some issues." "What kind of issues require a husband to leave?" His home. The question hung in the air between us, loaded with implication. Margaret had never liked me, had made it clear from the beginning that she thought David could do better, but she'd always maintained a veneer of civility. Now, with David absent and me as her only target, the gloves were coming off. Personal issues. I said carefully. "Personal issues." She repeated the words with distaste. "Is this about your career again? Your unwillingness to prioritize your marriage over your little architecture business?" The casual dismissal of my work, the assumption that any problems in our marriage must be my fault. The entitlement that led her to show up uninvited, it all crystallized into a moment of perfect clarity. This was what David had been protecting me from all these years. This was the voice in his head that told him my success was a threat. That a wife should be secondary to her husband's needs. That any problems in our marriage were likely my fault. For being too ambitious, too independent, too much. "Margaret," I said, my voice steady despite the anger building in my chest. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. David and I aren't hosting Thanksgiving this year. Don't be ridiculous. I've already bought my ticket. Then you'll need to make other arrangements." She stared at me as if I'd spoken in a foreign language. "I'm not leaving." "Yes, you are." The words came out with more force than I'd intended, but I didn't take them back. For 5 years, I'd been polite to this woman. I'd endured her criticisms of my cooking, my housekeeping, my career, my choice not to have children yet. I'd smiled through her stories about David's ex-girlfriends, her suggestions about how I could be a better wife, her passive-aggressive comments about my family's traditions. I was done. "How dare you speak to me like that?" Margaret said, rising from the couch. "I am David's mother. And I am David's wife. This is my house, and I'm asking you to leave your house." She laughed. But there was no humor in it. This house was bought with my son's money, furnished with his salary while you played with your little building projects. The words hit their target, awakening every insecurity I'd ever had about my financial contribution to our marriage. In the early years, When my firm was struggling, David had indeed carried most of our expenses. The house had been purchased primarily with his savings. The furniture chosen mostly with his income, but I'd contributed to, I paid for renovations. For the garden design, for countless improvements that had made this house our home, more. Importantly, I'd supported David emotionally, professionally, personally. I'd been his partner in every way that mattered. Get out, I said quietly. I will not get out. The words erupted from me with years of accumulated frustration. Get out of my house. Get out of my marriage. Get out of my life. I am done pretending. To be polite to you, Margaret stepped back, genuine shock replacing her imperious anger. In 5 years, I never raised my voice to her, never directly confronted her behavior. David will hear about this, she said, gathering her dignity round her like armor. Good. Tell him exactly what you said to me. Tell him how you dismissed my career. How you claimed my home isn't really mine. How you showed up uninvited to a house where you're not welcome. She opened her mouth to respond, then seemed to think better of it. Instead, she grabbed her suitcases and stalked toward the door. This is why my son is unhappy. She said as she reached the threshold, this is why your marriage is falling apart. You're selfish and ungrateful and completely wrong for him. The words should have hurt. A year ago, they would have sent me into hours of self-doubt and recrimination. Instead, they bounced off me like rain off glass. Maybe, I said, but at least I'm not you. After she left, I sat in my living room and marveled at how good it felt to finally speak my truth. For years, I've been afraid that standing up to Margaret would damage my relationship with David. Now I realize that not standing up to her had been damaging me. My phone buzzed 20 minutes later. A text from David. Mom says she came by and you threw her out. Are you okay? I stared at the message for a long time before responding. I'm fine. Your mother was out of line. What happened? Instead of typing a response, I called him Sarah. His voice was cautious, concerned. Your mother showed up uninvited, dismissed my career as a little business, told me this house isn't really mine, and generally made it clear that she thinks I'm the reason you left. So, yes, I threw her out. David was quiet for a long moment. I'm sorry. I should have been clearer with her about Thanksgiving being canceled. This isn't about Thanksgiving, David. This is about 5 years of her treating me like I'm not good. Enough for you, and you never once defending me. That's not true. When has Margaret ever complimented my cooking? Without adding a suggestion for improvement? When has she ever asked about my work without implying it's less important than yours? When has she ever treated me like a daughter-in-law instead of an inconvenience? The silence stretched between us, heavy with implications. She's my mother, David said finally, and I'm your wife. Or I was, before you decided her opinion mattered more than my dignity. Sarah, I stood up to her today, David, for the first time in 5 years. I told your mother exactly what I thought of her behavior, and it felt amazing. What are you saying? I'm saying that I've spent our entire marriage making myself smaller to accommodate other people's comfort. Yours, your mother's, your friends who make jokes about me being the breadwinner. I've apologized for my success, hidden my ambitions, swallowed my opinions to keep the peace. I never asked you to do that. You didn't have to ask. You just had. To fail to defend me often enough that I learned to defend myself by disappearing. The words hung between us, years of accumulated resentment finally given voice. I don't want you to disappear, David said quietly. Then why does it feel like that's exactly what you've been trying to make me do? He didn't have an answer for that. Or maybe he did, but wasn't ready to say it yet. I should go, I said. I need some time to think. About us, about everything. After I hung up, I realized that the conversation with Margaret had clarified something important. I'd been so focused on David's moment of violence, on the therapy and the apologies and the promises to change, that I'd lost sight of the bigger pattern. The push down the stairs hadn't come from nowhere. It had been the culmination of years. Of small erosions, tiny compromises, gradual diminishment of my sense of self. David might learn to manage his anger. He might never physically hurt me again. But could he learn to celebrate my success instead of resenting it? Could he learn to see my independence as strength rather than threat? Could he learn to stand up for me instead of expecting me to make myself smaller? Those were harder questions. And the answers would determine whether we had a future together. Thanksgiving came and went quietly. I spent it with Emma and her family, grateful for the noise and chaos of her 3 young children, for the way her husband Mark included me in conversations about work and politics, without any underlying tension about my opinions or achievements. It was the first holiday in 5 years where I didn't have to perform the role of perfect wife, and the relief was overwhelming. David texted me that morning, "Happy Thanksgiving. I'm grateful for you, always." I didn't respond immediately, not because I was angry, but because I was trying to figure out what gratitude meant in the context of our broken marriage. On the Monday after Thanksgiving, Rebecca brought coffee and pastries to the office and asked if we could talk. About work? I asked, though I could tell from her expression that it wasn't. About you. About whatever's been going on that's made you different these past few weeks. I considered deflecting, maintaining the professional boundary we'd always carefully observed. But Rebecca had been nothing but loyal and supportive. And I found myself wanting to tell someone the truth. "David and I are separated," I said. "Temporarily. I think we're working through some issues. Issues like him pushing you down the stairs." The words hit me like a physical blow. "How did you, Sarah? I've been working with you for 3 years. I know how you move, how you carry yourself. The day after you fell, you moved like someone who was hurt and scared. And the makeup you wore wasn't hiding a bruise from a fall, it was hiding a bruise from a hand." My carefully constructed lie crumbled in the face of a matter-of-fact assessment. "Why didn't you say anything?" "Because it wasn't my place to say anything. But it is my place to ask if you're safe now." "I'm safe. David moved out. He's getting help." "Good." Rebecca leaned back in her chair, studying me. "Are you planning to take him back?" "I don't know." "What would have to change for you to feel comfortable with him coming home?" It was a good question. One I'd been avoiding asking myself directly. "Everything," I said finally. "The way he handles stress, the way he deals with his mother, the way he responds to my success, the way he sees me. I think that's a lot of change." "Yeah, it is." "And if he can't change all of that, then I guess we're done." Saying the words out loud made them real in a way they hadn't been before. For the first time since this whole mess started, I allowed myself to seriously consider the possibility that my marriage might be over. The thought should have been devastating. Instead, it felt like relief. That evening, I drove to the Henderson property to check on the construction progress. The foundation was complete now, and the framing was beginning to take shape. Standing there in the gathering dusk, I could see the bones of the house that would become a home for Tom and Jennifer, and whatever children they might have. It was going to be beautiful, modern, but warm, efficient, but comfortable, perfectly suited to its site and its intended purpose. Looking at it, I felt the familiar pride that came with good work. With a project that was exceeding expectations, my phone rang. David's name on the screen. "Hi." I said, answering without the careful guardedness that had characterized our recent conversations. Hi, how is your Thanksgiving? Good. Quiet. Yours. Weird. I had dinner with Jim and Susan, his college friends. A couple who'd always been kind to me, but clearly felt awkward about our separation. It felt strange being there without you. I bet. Sarah, I've been thinking about what you said. About Margaret, about me not defending you. Okay, you were right. I've let her treat you badly for years. And I told myself it was because I didn't want to cause family drama. But really, I think I was afraid of confronting her because it would mean admitting that some of her criticisms of our marriage were actually criticisms of me. It was more insight than David had shown in months of conversations about our relationship. What? Do you mean she's always been critical of your career because she thinks wives should be more traditional? But I think what really bothered her, and what bothered me, if I'm honest, was that you were so obviously capable of taking care of yourself that you didn't need me the way she needed my father. I never said I didn't need you. No, but you never said you did, either. And somewhere along the way, I started equating your independence with rejection. The admission hung between us, honest and painful. David, I'm not trying to excuse what I did. There's no excuse for pushing you down those stairs, for putting my hands on you in anger. But I think I'm starting to understand why it happened. Why I've been so angry and resentful. What has Dr. Chen said about all this? That the violence was a symptom of deeper issues around control and masculinity? Then I need to do a lot of work on understanding what it means to be a partner to a strong, successful woman instead of feeling threatened by it. It was exactly what I needed to hear. But it also raised new questions. How long will that work take? I don't know. Longer than I want it to. Maybe longer than you're willing to wait. The honesty in his voice, the acknowledgement that this might be too much to ask of me, was somehow more hopeful than all his previous promises to change quickly. I miss you, he said quietly. I miss you too, but I don't miss being afraid of you. I don't miss walking on eggshells or making myself smaller to manage your emotions. I know, and I don't want you to have to do that anymore. I don't want to be the kind of man who makes his wife afraid. We talked for another hour. The conversation more honest and direct than any we'd had in months. When we finally hung up, I felt something I hadn't felt since the night he pushed me. Hope. Not hope that everything would go back to the way it was, that version of our marriage was over. And we both knew it. But hope that we might find a way to build something new. Something healthier. Something that could accommodate both of our truths. The next morning, I called Dr. Chen. I'd like to start couples counseling, I said. If David's willing, and if you think it would be helpful. I think it could be very helpful, he said. But only if you're both committed to the process. It's going to mean confronting some difficult truths about your relationship. I think we're ready for that. Then let's schedule something for next week. The couples counseling sessions were harder than I'd expected. Dr. Chen had a way of asking questions that cut straight to the heart of our problems, forcing us to examine patterns we'd both been avoiding. Sarah, he said during our third session, you mentioned that you often felt like you needed to manage David's emotions. Can you give me an example when he'd come home stressed from work? I'd try to anticipate what might set him off. I'd have dinner ready. I'd avoid bringing up anything that might frustrate him. I'd basically try to create this calm environment where he could decompress. And how did that make you feel? Exhausted, like I was responsible for his mood. Like his emotional stability was my job. Dr. Chen turned to David. What was your experience of those evenings? I thought she was being considerate. I didn't realize she was managing me, and when Sarah didn't manage your emotions effectively. When something did set you off, David was quiet for a long moment. I blamed her, not consciously. But looking back, I can see that I held her responsible for my reactions. Like it was her job to keep me calm, and if she failed at that, then my anger was her fault. It was painful to hear our dynamic laid out so clearly. To see how we both participated in creating a relationship where my worth was measured by my ability to keep David stable. This pattern is very common, Dr. Chen said. One partner becomes hypervigilant about the other's emotional state, while the other partner becomes dependent on that management. It creates a kind of learned helplessness on both sides. How do we change it? I asked. David has to learn to manage his own emotions without relying on Sarah to create the perfect conditions for his stability. And Sarah has to learn to stop taking responsibility for David's emotional reactions. What if I can't? David asked. What if I've gotten so used to having Sarah smooth things over that I can't function without it? Then you'll learn, Dr. Chen said simply. But it will take practice, and there will be setbacks. The work was slow and sometimes frustrating. David would make progress in therapy, then backslide when faced with a stressful situation. I would resolve to stop managing his emotions, then find myself falling back into old patterns when I sensed his mood shifting. But gradually, things began to change. David started taking responsibility for his stress management, going for runs when he felt overwhelmed, calling Dr. Chen when he felt his anger building, removing himself from situations that triggered him instead of expecting me to diffuse them. I started speaking up when something bothered me instead of swallowing my feelings. To keep the peace, I stopped apologizing for working late or traveling for business. I started treating my own needs as equally important to his thought. It wasn't easy. There were arguments, moments of backsliding, conversations that ended with one or both of us in tears. But for the first time in years, we were having honest conversations about what we needed from each other. 6 weeks into the couple's counseling, David asked if he could come home. I don't want to pressure you, he said as we sat in Dr. Chen's office, but I miss our life together. I miss falling asleep next to you and waking up in our bed and making coffee together in the morning. I miss those things too, but I also treasure the peace I'd found in our time apart. The sense of safety that came from not having to monitor anyone's moods but my own. What would be different? I asked. If you came home, how would we make sure we don't fall back into our old patterns? I've been thinking about that, David said. I think we need new rules, new agreements about how we handle conflict, how we support each other's work, how we deal with outside pressures like my mother. What kind of rules? No raised voices during arguments, no interrupting. If either of us feels triggered, we take a break and come back to the conversation when we're calmer. And your mother? David took a deep breath. I've been thinking about that a lot. I called her last week and told her that her behavior toward you was unacceptable, and that if she wants to be part of our lives, she needs to treat you with respect. How did she take that? Not well. She accused me of choosing you over family. Said I was being manipulated. He paused. I told her that wasn't how I saw it. I told her I was choosing my marriage over her need to control it. The words hit me with unexpected force. In 5 years of marriage, David had never explicitly chosen me over his mother's approval. And if she doesn't change her behavior, then she won't be welcome in our home. This is our life, Sarah, our marriage. I'm done letting other people dictate how we live it. Dr. Chen observed our conversation with the neutral expression he'd perfected. But I thought I saw approval in his eyes. "Those are significant changes, David," he said. "Are you confident you can maintain them when things get difficult?" "I'm confident I want to maintain them. Whether I can, I guess we'll find out, Sarah." "How do you feel about David coming home?" I considered the question carefully. The fear that had defined our separation was still there, but it was quieter. Now, more manageable. The hypervigilance had faded. In its place was something more complex, hope mixed with caution, love tempered by hard-won wisdom. "I want to try," I said finally, "but slowly. And with the understanding that if things go wrong again, if you hurt me again, it's over. No more chances, no more therapy, no more working through things. Just over." David nodded solemnly. "I understand. And I accept those terms. Then let's try." David moved back home on a Sunday in February, almost for months after he'd left. It felt strange at first, like having a familiar stranger in my space. But gradually we found our rhythm again. The new rules helped. We instituted a Sunday morning check-in where we talked about the week ahead. Any potential stressors, any support we needed from each other. We started scheduling regular date nights. Time that was just for us without work or family obligations. We continued both individual and couples therapy. Most importantly, we started treating each other as equals again. David began actively celebrating my professional successes instead of tolerating them. When the Henderson house was featured in Architectural Digest, he bought a copy for everyone in his office and bragged about his wife, the award-winning architect. When I landed the contract for a new sustainable housing development, he suggested we go out to dinner to celebrate. I stopped walking on eggshells round his moods and started trusting that he could handle his own emotions when he was stressed about work. I offered support if he wanted it, but didn't take responsibility for fixing his problems. When he seemed irritated about something, I asked about it directly instead of trying to guess what I'd done wrong. The changes weren't perfect or complete. There were still moments when I caught myself reverting to old patterns. Still times when David had to consciously redirect his responses. But the overall trajectory was positive. Margaret never apologized for her behavior during that final visit. But she did start treating me with something approaching basic courtesy. David's new boundaries with her made family gatherings less stressful. Though they were still not my favorite events, the Henderson house was completed in May. And Tom and Jennifer invited us to the housewarming party, standing in the kitchen. I designed watching them serve dinner to friends and family in the space we'd created together. I felt the deep satisfaction that came from work well done. "It's beautiful," David said, coming up behind me with 2 glasses of wine. "You should be proud." "I am," I said, and meant it. Later that evening, as we drove home through the hills, David reached for my hand. "Are you happy?" he asked. It was a question he'd started asking regularly, as if he needed constant reassurance that I wasn't just staying out of habit or fear. "I'm getting there," I said. "Are you?" "Yeah, I am. It's different than before, but better, I think." He was right. Our marriage was different now, more conscious, more deliberate, built on honesty rather than assumptions. We'd lost some of the easy intimacy we'd once shared, but gained something more valuable, genuine respect for each other's autonomy and strength. We'd learned that love wasn't enough to sustain a marriage. It took work and honesty and the willingness to change, even when change was difficult. It took courage to speak uncomfortable truths and humility to acknowledge mistakes. Most importantly, it took the recognition that a partnership meant too. Whole people choosing each other every day. Not one person diminishing themselves to accommodate the other's limitations. As we pulled into our driveway, I looked at our house, the place where David had pushed me down the stairs, where I'd learned to be afraid of my own husband, where we'd both done the hard work of rebuilding ourselves. And our relationship thought it looked the same from the outside. But everything inside had changed. We'd torn down the old foundation and built something new, something stronger, more stable, more honest, something that could support the weight of two full lives. To demanding careers, to imperfect people. Trying to love each other well, it wasn't the fairy tale we'd started with, but it was real. And after everything we'd been through, real felt like enough. The stairs no longer frightened me. They were just stairs, now a functional part of our home, not a symbol of what we'd almost lost. Some foundations can be repaired, some need to be completely rebuilt. Ours was stronger for having been broken first. The end author's note: this story explores themes of domestic violence, emotional abuse, and recovery. If you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence, help is available. National Domestic Violence Hotline. 1-800-7997-33 crisis text line. Text start to 88,788 for immediate danger. Call 911. Healing is possible, but it requires professional support, community resources, and above all, prioritizing safety.